So then when you read about the flywheel, you were like, oh,
I'm like, yes, actually, that's what we did.
That's what we did, right?
Of course.
We tried something new, and the first few turns at that flywheel were really difficult and required a lot of stakeholdering and a lot of introducing people to new ways of working. And the big pushes were there. But then once it got going, that flywheel, the momentum kept turning.
The shift in skepticism, right? The stakeholders who that first turned through were like, we can't do this. This is way too risky. We can't. They were the stakeholders who a year later would say things like, but wait a second, have you talked to the people who are doing that new thing? Because you should really be doing it their way. And that shift in a fairly short amount of time was, I think, unusual. And certainly when I compared it to some of my earlier experiences where the outputs were more theoretical and were more, here's a PowerPoint of how the world should be once we consultants leave, it seemed like the impact for the organization was so much more far-reaching and lasting.
Welcome to the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I explore the intricate layers of organizational change alongside insightful professionals in the field. My name is Ali Juma, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast. I am thrilled to have two exceptional guests with me today, Susan Bartlett and Terri Block, both principals at Workomics, who bring a wealth of expertise in organizational transformation. Susan Bartlett has over 15 years of experience in creating customer-centric workplaces that prioritize employee well-being and seamlessly integrate emerging technologies. With a diverse background that includes being a CEO of a consultancy, a strategy consultant at IBM, and a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford, Susan excels in co-creating with stakeholders and applying systems thinking to problem solving. Terri Block has spent a decade helping organizations navigate their toughest inflection points, craft strategic choices, and turn goals into transformative actions. Her extensive experience spans biotech, pharma, and education, and she's known for her strategic creative approach to problem solving and storytelling. In this episode, we unpack the change flywheel, a construct both Susan and Terri have adopted and enriched with their practical experiences. Join us to listen to their combined insights and explore how the change flywheel can drive meaningful organizational change. I am grateful to have Terri and Susan chatting with me today. Well, Susan and Terri, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I am eternally grateful for both of your time today.
A pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Today we're going to talk predominantly about the topic of a change flywheel or change management flywheel. But before we start, it will be fantastic if you introduce yourself to my audience. And I'll start with you, Susan.
For sure. So, hi, I'm Susan Bartlett, and I trained as a computer scientist and started out my career doing technology strategy consulting with IBM. And I have been consulting ever since. And over the years, I've touched on a whole lot of different, industries and problems, but the bulk of my work has ended up being in pharma and biotech. And then working at the intersection of organizational capabilities and customer experience. And of course, when you're working at the intersection of those two things, change is inevitable. And that has been a subtext of just about every project I've done from day one as a cub consultant. And then about 3 years ago, I started a firm that we call Workomics alongside Terri and our other partner, Michelle. And we have a wonderful time together with our teams and with our clients. We really enjoy it. And then outside of work, I have 2 little boys. I'm a I'm a big sports enthusiast. I'm a book clubber. And one of my favorite things to do is to sit down with a cup of coffee and a notebook and a pencil and just think and write. So that's me.
You still write. That's great.
I'm looking at her notebook right now with her handwritten notes.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Terri.
Sure. Thanks, Ali. My name's Terri Block. As Susan mentioned, I co-lead WorkComics alongside her. I'll share just a little bit about WorkComics. We're a small firm based in Toronto, small on purpose. And we help organizations who are at inflection points in their growth trajectory. Because we believe that if they can capitalize on those inflection points appropriately and in the best way that they can, it would set them on a new and higher plane. So that's what we have fun doing together. My consulting life started in 2013, and I've focused on strategy and patient customer experience in pharma and go-to-market initiatives, primarily in the cancer space and rare disease treatment in the pharmaceutical industry. However, my roots are actually in education, and I spent many years in the education field. A seminal career experience was my first out of university, where I worked with underserved youth who were trying to attain their high school equivalency diploma. And it was really there that I learned, and the notion was cemented for me, that everything is, in fact, change work. Nothing is about a specific, tactic or initiative. The specific thing that's in front of you, and everything is sort of that dance between what you make and how you actually get people to adopt it, or maybe they don't adopt it, and that teaches you something as well. So, between my career in education and in consulting in the pharmaceutical industry, and there's lots of overlap in those industries, surprisingly, but change management is a huge thread of the work we do.
I want to ask a question around what you do in your firm. Did you call it intentionally small?
That is a very conscious decision on our part, in that we wanted to build a workplace that we found fulfilling and enabled flourishing. And I think you can do that in workplaces of all sizes. But I think it is much easier to do it when you have a smaller team, because getting everyone on the same page is a much quicker exercise. And you're able to sort of set parameters around what the firm is, because you're not trying to grow and scale. So one of the things that we say to folks is that, there is no career ladder here, and there are no promotions. And those are all very valid things to want. And there are lots of companies where you can go, and that is going to be a big part of the employee experience. But it's not a part of what we're doing here. We're hopefully learning constantly and trying lots of new things. And we're hopefully paying everyone well and fairly, and sharing in the upside when things are going well. But it's not about becoming the vice president of something or the senior vice president of that. And that's harder to do when you're bigger. And what it does is it allows us to focus on the work and working with the clients and producing deliverables. Because when a firm gets bigger, and we speak from experience here, when you're in a senior role, you stop doing the work. You are really overseeing the work, you're guiding the work, and you're running the business. By keeping it small, running the business is something that we can do alongside the client work and delivering the projects.
I like that. Terri, first of all, why would a client approach your service? What sort of problems do they have, or what sort of opportunities do they have?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of our clients approach us with problems that are really at the intersection of customer experience and employee experience. And so they may be wondering, how do we build better things for our customers in a way that also truly engages our employees? And I think organizations are really struggling with both of those things right now, in particular, as remote work is a piece. I think particularly post-pandemic, how to engage employees has become a really important question that organizations are asking. And so when they're thinking of their go-to-market strategies and when they're thinking about how they're going to delight their customers, they also need to be thinking, what are our employees experiencing as we deliver on that? And so that's the sweet spot that we really like to work in. Yeah.
That's a fantastic. That intersection is not an easy thing to achieve. I mean, that's your utopia, right? And we struggle with that on a daily basis. And sometimes you get close to it and then only to miss it the following day, because a change happens and a change is always disruptive by nature. Is that what your observation is, Susan?
I would say yes. I think when we talk about organizations being at inflection points, they are by definition moments of change and of flux. And because things can be moving so quickly, the people in the organization are actually changing each day. And so you can communicate and communicate and communicate. And then you come in the next day and something has shifted in the environment.
Yes.
And your communication needs to pivot again. And so it is a notion of just always needing to be focused on how things are moving and how we're tying that together and connecting the dots for people so that their job and what they're trying to get through with their day is still laddering up to the big picture and where the organization as a whole is trying to go.
I want to share with you something that I would like some insight on. I'm always curious that organizations are unique individually, and so are countries. In Australia, and I'm not speaking on behalf of Australia, but my observation over the last 25 years in here, in Australia, we don't take life seriously. We are cynics most of the time. And I've done some research around comparing us with our fellow Americans. For example, politicians in here, they have a hard time to convince us that they are the right people. So we never go by headlines and all of that. We would like to see real action, and real action consistently over a long period of time until we believe in you. So change is hard. We actually say if you can manage change in Australia, you can manage it anywhere. From your observation, what is the Canadian workplace like? Like if you follow the normal norms of managing change effectively with the right communication, the support, all of those things, creating the experience, change, is that a predictable outcome for a positive change?
I think, and I will caveat that we actually, although we are based in Toronto and all our employees are here in Canada, we actually do most of our client work south of the border.
Okay.
But my experience of Canada is as a very risk-averse place that is probably more resistant to change than other places. I think that's fair to say. Mm-hmm. And I think also a very earnest place in that people do tend to take things at face value. And there isn't that same default to cynicism or irony that you might get elsewhere in the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
Sort of as a national attribute, at least.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think these are a right society and a wrong society, just the way it is. And these are the norms in a society. It just makes it challenging for people like me to to be so damn good at what I do to influence change in the workplace. And so I use an analogy that I took my son to the gym to show him where I go to the gym. And I said to him, these weights are just, too heavy for me. And he said to me, you mean you're not strong enough to lift them? And then it was an innocent remark. But the idea is that it's not really the challenge, is our strength towards that challenge. So I enjoy, although it is hard to manage change here in Australia, I enjoy the challenge. I really like how you use the word earnest, because I think in Australia, once you build credibility, you're good. You are in a good place. Maintaining the credibility is a different challenge. But and so people in here, if they are respected with a few words, they can influence the whole workplace. So that's where we are. I want to shift gear, and then I want to talk about your principle of the change management or change flywheel. I know this is a concept that's come from Jim Collins. Over to you, Terri. Maybe start us, and Susan, you can add whatever you want to add to it. Where did the idea come from? What attracted you to the idea, and how applicable is it to the workplace?
So, I'm happy to take this answer, but I actually think we should pass it to Susan, because this came from Susan's read of Jim Collins's book. And so I think she's most well positioned to talk about what inspired her about it. And then I can add on about what inspired me once she got inspired.
Take it over, Susan.
Well, I think I should confess that it was not a case of reading it in a book and saying, aha, I will go and do this, as much as reading it in a book and having a flash of recognition that this was actually a framework that helped to explain why a particular approach was working. And I think our approach in our work is very pragmatic. We really try to avoid theoretical exercises, complex frameworks. Let's make a lot of PowerPoints and have a lot of conversations. And at the end of the day, we have strategic imperatives, but there's nothing to put in front of a customer. That we think there's some value, of course, in defining your North Star and where you're headed. But you really need to just start going there, because inevitably there's going to be, roadblocks that you hit along the way, and you can't anticipate all of them. And spending a lot of time trying to anticipate all of them is just not a good use of limited resources. And we had done a project working with a large company where we had done this, a fairly brief North Star exercise. I think it lasted a few months. And then we immediately said, well, let's get going and make some things to put in front of customers. And that's what we did. We built a variety of customer touch points for a variety of different parts of the business. And over the course of that, we really established an organizational capability and a new way of working, which in my experience is a very difficult thing to do. Organizations are very set in their ways. But because we were leading with the value and with the results, people were so excited to come along. Like, can we do that too? Because I would like to get that great result that I saw my colleague get. And that's a very different mindset. And, I can tell you that, we've long since moved on from working with that organization. And I think all of the original people we worked with on that organizational capability have moved on as well. And yet the organizational capability is still there and being applied. And for me, that is perhaps, like the greatest triumph as someone who makes their living in a consulting capacity, to have done work over a decade ago now and still have it be something that is being used, having shape-shifted and being adapted, because of course the organizational context has shifted too. And I really credit the fact that while we did do a little bit of upfront, what's the strategy, what's the goal here, we much more quickly got down to let's make things, put them out in the world, and see how the customers react.
So then when you read about the flywheel, you were like, oh,
I'm like, yes, actually, that's what we did.
That's what we did, right?
Of course.
We tried something new, and the first few turns at that flywheel were really difficult and required a lot of stakeholdering and a lot of introducing people to new ways of working. And the big pushes were there. But then once it got going, that flywheel, the momentum kept turning.
The shift in skepticism, right? The stakeholders who that first turned through were like, we can't do this. This is way too risky. We can't. They were the stakeholders who a year later would say things like, but wait a second, have you talked to the people who were doing that new thing? Because you should really be doing it their way. And that shift in a fairly short amount of time was, I think, unusual. And certainly when I compared it to some of my earlier experiences where the outputs were more theoretical and were more, here's a PowerPoint of how the world should be once we consultants leave, it seemed like the impact for the organization was so much more far-reaching and lasting.
What can get in the way of a flywheel? First of all, I like that with anything, I suppose, the start is difficult. And it's almost like creating a movement. But once you get going, you enlist more people, you've got more advocates, and before you know it, you've got a movement happening within an organization, which is a wonderful thing to observe. What can get in the way of a flywheel starting properly? Is it leadership? Is it purpose? Is it context? Or is it all of the above?
I think it can be all of the above. I think there's a couple of things that come to my mind immediately. One is from an on-the-ground employee perspective, the notion that you have to put strategic work into practical application as soon as possible is super important. People have to see how the change is going to live in their day-to-day. And they can't just see it in a PowerPoint presentation. They need to actually feel the change. How am I going to implement this change in my day-to-day work? And so one obstacle is that if we can't make that connection clear enough, the flywheel can stop working, because the flywheel depends on people doing the work and learning from it, iterating on it, trying it again, doing it better, sharing the learnings, getting more people involved. And so if that first link of how does it connect to my day-to-day isn't there, that can be really challenging. The other thing that comes to mind from a leadership perspective, which we have faced quite a few times in our consulting careers, is when the context changes. Often these initiatives that we're asked to do are asked for in contexts that are budget friendly, things are going well, yes. Everyone has time and breathing room to make space in their hearts and minds for this kind of work. And then budgets start, business doesn't do well potentially, or budgets start getting clawed back. And, I was recently at a conference where Patrick Enns, the president of Capital One Canada, was saying, often organizations can start thinking that's the strategy. The budget cutting is the strategy, yeah. Or the downsizing is the strategy. And it's really not. And even though those things are happening in the context, maintaining the commitment to the strategy that you created in the first place from leadership's perspective is super important. And I think one of those obstacles to the flywheel is getting distracted from your strategy, from the thing you're trying to do, by those broader context pieces.
I subscribe to the misconception around that budget cuts can be seen by some as their strategy, and it is not. as you said that. I'm working with a couple of clients remotely now overseas, and 6 months ago we were talking about AI strategy, and that was what you just described, Terry, is when wonderful times, the context is nice. I call it the peace time. When we are in peacetime, we love new ideas. And then, unfortunately, 4 months ago, the context changed, market changed, and therefore we started panicking around cost. And all of a sudden, the AI strategies become shelved. And for me, the question to both of you is that, what is the risk of this? Something is emerging technology as AI, and the advantages and the promise and the potential of it. And yet we are in the middle of a bushfire happening. How does an organization, and Susan, you can elaborate on that if you like, how does an organization, when I say organization, I'm talking about the leadership, how would they balance the two, managing a problem, not losing sight of the opportunity? That is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it really isn't. And I actually think back to the most acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic when, most businesses had a lot of challenges to manage. And I think paradoxically that sometimes it is actually okay to be a bit more inward and say, you know what, it is actually a good moment to pause, not stop, but pause, a focus on longer term strategic things. Because when there's this kind of upheaval in an organization, people's bandwidth and capacity to deal with change, to deal with new, it is already pretty drained. And so by deferring, you can actually set yourself up for more success later. And I will also say that the flip of that, I think, is ways in which a more flywheel-based approach can insulate you from those pressures. Because if you take your strategy and very quickly go to, okay, this is a thing we're going to do, the tactical things that you've built can continue to run and can continue to turn over, even while you're maybe not, pursuing green fields from a more strategic lens. And you're still learning and you're still making progress because you've actually got something that's running in the market. And I think that is why, translating into something practical that is central to the business's mission is so important, because it means it's something that kind of, no matter what's going on around you, you can still be pursuing something that, if it is still sitting as a strategy, can get parked and maybe sometimes should be parked because the organization's capacity to deal with it is no longer there.
Yeah. I think also in certain circumstances, when, especially with things like AI, where most people are not AI experts, right? Including leadership. Often, it's coming down from leadership that we need to do AI, but folks aren't experts. And I think it's easy to stop something and to pause something when you don't know what it is. And so when you employ the flywheel model of change management, and you've got project teams going on some very practical projects, you're building expertise and proof points in the organization. And no one can, you can no longer say, oh, we don't really know what this is. So it's actually less easy to pause.
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly had some work we were doing recently where, market conditions changed, and a huge element of the strategy that had been pursued was paused. But because we had tangibly built a number of customer touch points, they were still there. They were still being used. And you can actually feel that momentum picking up around those things again. And yes, the strategy has changed because the context has changed. But the tangible, practical, customer tactics that are in market are now being adapted and pivoted towards a new approach that is more suited to the current context. And in that way, I think, more momentum has been maintained than would have been the case otherwise.
I like that. The word pause is the key word in here. And I think it is sometimes about survival and not just progress. You remind me of this. I got given an advice maybe, 25 years ago. And I was really chasing this particular role and position, and I didn't get it. And then the coach was saying to me, we need to do those things, and then he gave me the metaphor or analogy, I suppose, that sometimes, I don't know about Canada, but in here, if somebody's on the right-hand side, it's understandable, the faster lane on the highway. But sometimes you get Ali stuck on the right-hand side, and Ali's not moving, Ali's staying on 80 kilometers an hour. Sometimes I need to slow down to go left to overtake Ali. And so the idea is that sometimes we need to slow down to go faster later. And I stuck in my head always, and that's a professional, being patient enough. So I like I think the key word is pause, and leaders will have to make some choices and decisions, and a strategy is a choice, I suppose. I want to shift gear, and I want to talk about, I think Terri mentioned the employee experience. I want to share with both of you what I've been thinking about this over the years, and I really focused on quite a few things. So change is not the goal. The goal is the goal. So we've got Dr. Fuda here, who's just a wonderful thought leader in here. I've been begging him to come on my podcast for years now, and he always says maybe next year. So I'll get him at some stage. But he had this, which changed my whole thinking, that change is not the goal is the goal. When we introduce a new change in the workplace, our measure really should be the employee experience, because that's the ultimate thing. It's not the adoption. It's when they adopt it and what happens after. It's like me realizing this epiphany. I ran marathons. I used to say it's the finish line. And I discovered later it's actually not the finish line. It's the person I become after the finish line. That is the ultimate aim. So in my head, I always think, of course, employees expect you to support them. Of course, employees expect you to communicate to them and train them and handhold them sometimes to create that momentum in the flywheel. But the ultimate is when you ask people, how did you feel after all of this? Am I delusional in my thinking?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think that is really gets at the heart of it, because actually, adopting a new organizational capability or a new system or anything is all well and dandy. But if employees aren't more effective in their jobs or more efficient or able to flourish more, feel more connected to the impact they're having in the world, like if there isn't some broader so what, then who cares that they started doing it differently?
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is bringing a story to mind. I'll share with you a story of me ordering a bunk bed for my child from an organization that prides itself on customer experience. I will not name the organization, but they're very big online distributor of furniture. They pride themselves on customer experience. You can see it in everything they do. They send surveys for customer feedback. You have an incredible bot that you can order furniture from. They've really thought the customer experience system through. I received the bunk bed. the bunk bed is completely damaged. It has a ton of damage on it. And I phone their wonderful customer service representative to get some help. And this person answers the phone with enthusiasm and kindness. And I'm thinking to myself, how lucky this organization is that they have employed this wonderful human being, because this is a person who is doing excellent customer service. And I share the problem, and they give me all the empathy in the world. And they share with me my 3 options for solutions. 1, I can send the bunk bed back, which we've already built, because my husband didn't notice the damage. I did. And I was away for work.
Of course.
2, we can get a discount, but then lose our right to warranty for the remainder of the product. And 3, I honestly can't remember the other option. And so I said, thank you, lovely human being, for those options. I'd like to take option 1 and 2. Oh, no, the third option was, we can resend you the part that is damaged. And I said, I'd like to take option 2 and 3. I'd like to take the discount because we took a full day off of work to build this bed. And I would like the replacement parts, so on the next opportunity that we can take a day off of work, we can actually fix it. And this amazing person who works at this customer service driven organization says, my online system that I'm working with will not allow me to choose 2 solutions. I have to pick 1. And I thought to myself, what a missed opportunity to 1, solve my problem, like really solve it. And 2, to make this employee feel like a winner, right? That employee left that interaction having done everything right, but her system did not support her decision-making in the way that it needed to. And just in that one choice, her employee experience satisfaction score came down, and my customer experience satisfaction score came down. And so it's just an interesting anecdote to your question, Ali.
So, Terri, this is about, I'm a big advocate of, we need to be masters of change impact. Because everything you introduce, and I might be completely wrong, but I'm yet to be proven wrong with this one. I think all changes fail or because we could not really understand the first or second or third layer of impact. Am I close to accurate in here? Because when I dig deep into any failure, I discovered that somebody somewhere could not really understand the deeper impact of introducing this particular change. So, for example, the example that you just shared, somebody somewhere could not really go deeper and to understand the impact of this new technology that will not offer you more than 1 option. Open to you.
I think
Have
that's
a comment.
I mean, that tracks for me, I think. And that's a big part of the work that we do is, we prototype these things. We put it in front of people. We might have even prototyped that screen with a customer to see what the reaction would be. We take it 3 levels deeper so that we can get to those moments. And so, yes, I think that's right. If you're not spending the time to understand the impact of the decisions on the user experience and the employee experience downstream, you will miss something.
Yes.
Well, and I think more also that you will miss things regardless, right? The perfect solution has never been rolled out at day 1 or day 1,000. And so I think equally it's just a recognition that change is constant and that the system is never done, and we always have to be prepared to make a change when it's called upon, and not let the change fatigue build up and just be like, no, nobody can even think about touching that system yet again, just because we've uncovered yet another, blip in the matrix.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're talking about here, Susan, is that yes, level 1 is kind of easy because these are the predictables. Level 2, it can be more complex, and then it gets even more complex at level 3. If we understand level 3, everything will be really good. But there are what we call the review times when you review the limitations of any change. I think time is a good factor later to really understand the level 2 and level 3 at a deeper level. But unfortunately, the majority of us in organizations, we run a project and then we leave it after that and we move on to the next one, which is not a criticism. But I think when in the proverbial, when we hand it over to the business as usual, which is never business as usual, but we hope that the management of this particular team will put their hat on as change managers themselves and understand that those levels of impact later, because we can't see them when we roll it out. Some of the impacts will come probably years after. And so that's the vigilance that we hope organizations will have. But both of you in your organization promote the pilot mindset. Does that help at the start? Is that what you're talking about, Terri, when you talk about the prototype?
Sure. I mean, I think for us, the notion that we prototype is just very much built into our ways of working. We don't take things to the finish line and then show them to our clients, because that doesn't set anyone up for success. And we also encourage our clients not to just put things in front of their customers and employees that they haven't been building along the way alongside their customers and employees. So certainly that's, prototyping is a way of working that is very dear to us. Susan, you've got some thoughts on the pilot mindset.
I think a place I wanted to go with it is I was reading something a few weeks ago about, the language inside consultancies or agencies or vendors of like, is it client ready? And if you work in a service provider, you probably use those words, 10 times a day. And I was thinking, oh gosh, I don't think we've ever used those words at Workomics. And I think the reason is because we truly believe that anything can be client ready as long as you framed it appropriately. And so I want to share with you these 2 bullet points that I just scratched down on a whiteboard to see if they resonate. That can be client ready. But if you present it as, here's the result of all of this is the answer to your problem, then it won't be. And so I think when we talk about the pilot mindset, we are talking about just this being open to the goal is not fixed. Our understanding of the problem is not fixed. And the more often we can go back and forth and iterate, the quicker we're going to get to something that's practical and useful. And again, we're back at the flywheel and creating momentum. I think when we use the term pilot, we're more often talking about containing risk from a particular decision versus momentum is a little bit more, or flywheel is a little bit more about building the momentum.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I like the pilot mindset. I do have some limitations. I do have some observations that some project managers use pilot a bit loosely, because sometimes when we pilot something, we have a number of staff that participate in the pilot. And if we don't control, maybe control is not the right word, if we don't manage the communication properly, sometimes the pilot can actually cause more harm before the big change happens. Meaning I always take pilots seriously. There are many changes happening within a context on a limited capacity. The pilot for me as a change and comms person, when I observe a pilot, I observe how people react to the change, what sort of messages are actually landing and not landing. So it's a learning environment for me as a professional as well, and not just about the change. I love the pilot principle. I take it seriously, but unfortunately, sometimes we really don't understand the importance of pilot. What I've taken from your I read your article. I've taken from that is that the pilot mindset is that be ready to experiment. And I like what Terri mentioned is that, was it Terri or yourself, Susan, that the goal is not quite fixed. Susan, it's the destination. We just need to create the destination, and then the flywheel will take care of itself. So it just made me think, because just yesterday I was working on a piece of work, and I did put a target in a couple of years' time, and now I'm ashamed because the target will actually probably move a little bit. So if I tell my client that is the target and that's the goal, I'm probably misguided in there. So I think I'm going to focus on what you just mentioned in here, do the basics well, and allow for experimentation, because only through experimentation you're going to learn a lot and understand those levels of impact that we were talking about earlier. Just allowing ourselves that space to really understand, rather than we know where this is going to go, because it is a human and I'm a human. So I'm going to go back to my plan and actually change it and say the target is not fixed. Well, that's what Susan told me, so I'm just going to blame it on you, Susan.
The vulnerability there too, right, is important, and just being willing to say, like, here's the thing that I've made, but I'm really open to shifting it based on what you think and what you have to say. We're going to go and do a workshop with brand new clients next week. And we've been immersed in all of their documents and so on. And so we've sent them, like, here's the map of how we think, this particular world unfolds. And we know we've got stuff wrong, right? Because we found contradictions in the documents we reviewed. And we looked at some stuff and the date was 2020. And we're like, well, I'm not sure if we can rely on that. But we said, you know what, we're going to be clearly wrong rather than vaguely right. And we're not going to say, no, we're not ready to do this workshop because this is the right time to do the workshop. Instead, we're going to say, here's our map. We know it's not perfect. We know you will have things that you think should be changed and added and removed. And we can't wait to hear that from you, because we're going to come out of this workshop so much more aligned and so much readier to build and make progress on the change that's in front of us all.
Wonderful way to put this, Susan. Thank you. We are coming close to the end of the podcast. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I want to ask you a couple of more questions, and I'm aware of your time as well. One is about AI and the technology. How it's a big topic. I am in the middle of it. I'm actually lucky enough to be in a deep rabbit hole into how the potential of this new technology. From where you sit, how do you see this technology perhaps impacting the workplace and maybe reshaping it?
I have many thoughts on this. My head is going into a very particular place, which is, I think there are organizational mandates to start exploring some of these things. I was at a conference recently, and the person who was speaking from Microsoft, his name is Jay Bromett, made a really interesting point on an individual level, which is, even as individuals who function as part of bigger teams and organizations, make time to practice using generative AI. Start building your skills, even if it's at home, giving it prompts, learning to use it as a personal assistant or as a direct report. Start building your muscle for how to actually engage with it on an individual level, so that when these organizational edicts come down and these pilots begin, people have already started using their muscles a little bit. And I'll tell you, Allie, that my 6-year-old son often asks me to look at pictures on Google. He knows Google is a thing, and he says, show me a picture of a dragon or show me a picture of an octopus. And he'll sometimes ask me to show him pictures of things that I don't want to show him. Maybe, he wants to see pictures of weapons or something like that. And, I'll say to him, oh, I asked Google that question and I didn't get the picture that you wanted. And his response to me the other night was, oh, you just didn't ask it the right question. Mm. And I thought to myself, and in discussion with a friend of mine and colleague of mine, I had the realization that our kids' generation will be the digital AI. Sorry, we call the digital natives. Their generation will be the AI natives. And that to me is just an interesting place where this is all kind of going. But I know Susan also has some major thoughts on this, so by all means.
I don't have too much to add.
No, okay.
That's fine.
Over to you, Susan.
I guess one of the things that I think about a lot is how artificial intelligence, maybe a bit more broadly, getting outside the large language models, starts to codify the things that we do in different ways. And because in order for, a machine learning algorithm to be effective, it needs to be taking, the richness of human experience and reducing it into some sort of mathematical model that is just, the fundamental precept of how that operates. And there's a lot of hidden choices in that. And I think it will end up shaping human behavior in interesting ways because people are very, very smart. And when they realize that a model is picking up certain activities or rewarding certain actions, you will get more of them. And the trouble with some of these AI models is that, the complexity with which the real world experience is being translated is a bit of a black box. And so we're not actually sure what is getting rewarded until we see the really problematic behavior unfolding. And so I think I would probably describe myself as AI cautious and thinking that there's probably going to be a lot of unintended side effects anytime you introduce this technology into places. Mm-hmm. And so really being mindful of the second and third and fourth order effects as the result of bringing in this technology and being prepared to shift around those higher order effects and adapt to them as well, and or to pull back the AI and say, oh gosh, some of those higher order effects made it not worthwhile, and this is not the right choice. The trade-offs are not what we want. Yeah. So I think those are the things that I think about in this domain.
I like that. I have been using it extensively. ChatGPT organized my travel in Europe last June. Everything that I asked it to do, I will tell it in the morning that I am tired today. I am at this hotel. I would like to walk to a cafe by the water, and then I would like to have lunch somewhere. I would like to go to 2 tourist attractions nearby. I would like to have a siesta, and then give me a plan. Boom. It gives me all the information that I need. Yes, sometimes knowing me, I don't stick to the plan, and now I am extending I'm putting so much pressure on even things like Copilot and there are things that it can't do now, but I think it's learning very quickly. And the other thing that I want to share with both of you is that at a higher level, I've been closely monitoring how AI, the open source, the company, how they are rolling out this particular change for adoption. They sent it to us. They made us play with it. and that's the easy way to actually get us. So, and I'm observing how Microsoft is trying to monopolize the whole market in the generative AI. I am the third type of person. So Terri has been sitting in the middle around it. You're a bit cautious. I'm an evangelist about it. I think I am living in an age now. Thank God this is happening in my lifetime. I was saying to a guest the other day, when the internet came in the 90s, I ignored it. And I thought, I don't care about this thing, until later I realized I should have been on board early. This is the second historical moment in my life when AI has come. And I think this is an inflection point where this is why I thought this is my time. And I've just been lucky enough to be working on an AI strategy for a university now with thinkers. And so I see the potential. Of course, anything has got negative impacts if we, AI has already been used for evil purposes in armies. But I think as humans, the good will always win at the end. It may take time. And I see the positive impacts, especially when I'm close now to what researchers are doing in agriculture, in managing crops, all of those things. This is at a higher level. Generative AI, I think I'm so lucky that this happened in my lifetime. And I'm going to be hopefully getting both of you back at some stage, and we might have a different colored conversation about AI by then. But we're coming to the end of the podcast. I know that I've gone over time, but that is a sign of me enjoying the conversation. I am grateful to both of you to join me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I've learned a lot. I hate you because now I have to go back to my plans and change them. But I think both of you are on a great mission, and I think you're doing a fantastic job with your organization. Last question: what would be the piece of advice to people like me in the changing communication space? From you, Terri, we start with you.
I would say to encourage practitioners, whether it's themselves or if they're consultants, to encourage their clients not to say no to an opportunity to put their work in front of someone. And so going back to what Susan was saying earlier, we are facilitating a workshop next week with an artifact that we started building 3 or 4 weeks ago. Is it really ready? Probably not as ready as it could be, but we were not going to say no to that opportunity. And the reason we're not saying no to that opportunity is because it will be an opportunity to see where what we've built falls apart, where it resonates, how it can get better. And we aren't going to be by ourselves. We're going to be with 10 stakeholders to help us do that. And so it's very tempting to shy away and to say, oh, it's not ready. But really encourage everyone to create the conditions that allow you to bring something less than perfectly ready in front of your stakeholders to get going.
And it's an opportunity to influence as well. So
exactly.
Yes. Thank you, Susan.
I think to not lose sight of the multifaceted people that are part of whatever change you're trying to enact. I think it is very easy to think of them as users that need to adopt a system or need to adopt a new way of working. But in fact, they're complex human beings who, have lives outside work and have reasons that they come and do this job every day. And the more we can think about that holistically and fold it into the work that we do, the more likely we are to have not just change that is adopted, but change that makes a difference.
Change that makes a difference. That is a great spot to stop today. Thank you so much for your time, Susan and Terri. how would people reach out to you and get hold of you and connect with you?
Well, we are on LinkedIn. Workomics has a Substack, which is free to subscribe. Goes out once a month, come hell or high water. And we are, what else?
Our website.
Our new website that is still in beta, but on its way.
Well, that's another example. It is in beta. We put it out into the world, even though it wasn't perfectly ready.
Yes.
So that's www.workomics.com, not to be mistaken with workonomics.com.
Yes. I'm sure that lots of people I'm sure you've thought about that as well. I like that. Stay in beta mode, actually. That's probably a good way to end it. Terri and Susan, been pleasure having you in my Inner Game of Change podcast. Until next time, stay well and stay safe.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode valuable, remember to subscribe to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Your support is truly appreciated. And by sharing this podcast with your colleagues, friends, and fellow change practitioners, it can help me reach even more individuals and professionals who can benefit from these discussions. Remember, and in my opinion, change is an enduring force, and you will only have a measure of certainty and control when you embrace it. Until next time, thank you for being part of the Inner Game of Change community. I am Ali Jama, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast.
It was good. It was fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I had more to say about AI, but we had to stop.
Yeah.